In front of me is Radoslaw Sikorski, former foreign minister of Poland. Mr. Sikorski, thank you very much for the interview and welcome on the program. And I would like to especially thank you for having invited us to this really nice country house somewhere in the middle of Poland, 3 hours from Warsaw. So I would like to talk about foreign policy and evidently, their current government is firmly anti-Kremlin, and they repeatedly accuses the former government of underestimating the threat coming from Russia. And recently, they have got rid of all GIMO students and all people who dealt in some way with the communist regime out of, they have eventually thrown them off the diplomatic service. Was it the right thing to do?
Well, Polish-Russian relations are very complicated for good historical reasons. So there's a legacy there which I think requires a process of reconciliation. And reconciliation, first of all, needs telling the truth, establishing the facts. And we had that kind of process with Germany. And when I was in government, we were trying to have that kind of process with Russia as well. The Russian Orthodox Church and the Polish Catholic Church signed similar documents that Polish and German bishops signed. We had a commission for difficult issues where Russian and Polish historians were jointly establishing the facts of common history. And we had a political and diplomatic reset even before the Obama administration tried that.
So did I get you right that the accusations which we hear right now from the current government are partly valid, that the previous government underestimated, understated the risks that could come from Russia?
Well, no, because I was among those ministers who warned our partners in the West that, look, Georgia is a harbinger of things to come. We told people, look, what President Putin said in Bucharest at the NATO summit, that Ukraine is an artificial country, that this is dangerous. This means that Russia has not acquiesced with the loss of empire, with the otherness of Ukraine and Ukraine's right to have a separate existence, and that this will have consequences. And I can prove this because thanks to WikiLeaks, the American diplomatic telegrams have been published, so you can find out what I was telling my American colleagues.
Could you characterize the current Polish government as really Russophobic?
Yeah, when Russian generals threaten us with nuclear weapons, what are we supposed to feel? When Russia conducts Zapad exercises in which Poland is the target of a nuclear strike, well, that's a very good way of maintaining the phobia. What worries me is that we don't seem to have any relations now. You know, we talk at each other through the media or shout at each other through a keyhole. And that can be dangerous because it creates room for misunderstandings. But at the same time, remember that the current Polish ruling party, ideologically speaking, is indistinguishable from United Russia. It's just that they don't. It's just that they are nationalist populists who have radically conflicting interests.
But it's a good point that you have just mentioned. Yes, if you look at populist parties and the ruling party of Poland, Law and Justice, is referred to as a populist or right-wing party. If you look at other parties like this across the Eastern and Central Europe, you would see that they basically like Putin because they share the same values. So they have they try to preserve or to restore these really traditional values. They are nationalistic, they are Eurosceptical towards the United Europe.
Because there is a fundamental difference between them and all the other right-wing populists in Europe. They don't have a border with Russia. We do. And they were never occupied by Russia. We have been. I think Russian people should be worried by the fact that Russia has pretty bad relationships.
No, but with the Czech Republic, it was occupied.
But you don't have a border.
Yeah, yeah.
And the Czechs don't feel, we are their tank mine.
Mm-hmm. So that's about phobia.
It's about the fact that Russia is the only conceivable existential threat to Poland. We don't think it's a current threat, but Russia exercises scenarios and some Russian politicians say things that are very dangerous to us. So yes, many people in Poland fear Russia.
But is it true that you were quoted as saying that if Russia tries to invade Poland, we will, our army alone will, I will say it in Russian, расквасим им лицо. So we are strong enough to
yes, I think
to resist.
I think Poland, Ukraine proved quite a difficult target for Russian aggression. Poland would fight, of course. That's what we have. We have the world's 18th military budget, and we would fight back. And I don't think Russia could win a war with Poland without mobilization. And therefore, and we're also part of the strongest military alliance in the world. So you shouldn't try. But there are Russian politicians who threaten us, and when you're threatened, you respond.
Regarding current security policies that are conducted by the Polish government, so according to the Minister of Defense, he said it in the middle of August this year, he said that he would like to station the US military base here in Poland to be sure that just to somehow deter Russia from possible invasion. What are the pros and cons of this action? Are you supportive of this?
If you ask someone in Germany or even in Russia or in Ukraine 5 or 10 years ago whether Russia would invade Crimea, people would say, no, come on, impossible. And yet it happened. You have an army as an insurance policy for what you think is not likely to happen, but might happen. And therefore, every country in the world has contingency plans for a conflict that you don't want, but that is possible. And just like Germany, during the Cold War, had 300,000 Americans on its soil to deter the Soviet Union, so Poland has its own army and also wants to have some...
So you're in favor of this decision?
I worked very hard to bring it about. We want in Poland the kind of allied forces that would deter Russia but not threaten Russia. So I think 2 brigades, which is the sort of aim that we have, is the kind of presence that was discussed between American and Russian militaries at the time of our accession to NATO, and which I think is reasonable. You cannot invade Russia with 2 brigades, okay? The Wehrmacht tried with 100 divisions and failed, okay? So 2 brigades doesn't threaten Russia, but reassures Poland.
So did I get you right that you think that it's good to rely in terms of security on the United States? Because previously you said it would be better to rely on the European Union. 2
insurance policies are better than 1. So we should have the American insurance policy. And yes, with Donald Trump in the White House and behaving very strangely in his press conference with President Putin, that's why we don't know what President Trump would do in a crisis with Russia. And that's one of many reasons why I believe that the European Union should also have a defense policy worthy of its name. And I'm very glad that in the new multi-annual budget of the EU, there is for the first time 10 billion euros for defense capabilities. We need them mainly in the south. We need to protect the southern border of the European Union from mass migration, for example. Because I think in the east it's a serious job for NATO. But Europe, as the largest economy on earth, with its interests, should also have the possibility of backing up its diplomacy, not only with humanitarian assistance, developmental assistance, trade policy, but also, if need be, with force. Because I believe in Tony Blair's idea that we shouldn't be a super state, but we should be a superpower.
What would you say about the possible reaction of Russia if you have the permanent use military base here in Poland?
Well, we already have a pretty permanent presence of NATO troops in the Baltic states. We have, I think, 2 American bases in Romania. Russia withdrew from the Conventional Forces Europe Treaty, which limited the presence of conventional troops, on the argument that we, Russia, should be able to move our troops around our territory as we please. Well, if you can move as you please, so can NATO. So
probably I'm wrong, but you sound to me as a great support of the current government, at least in terms of their security policies, in terms of how they estimate conceivable, as you say, as you put it, threats. Is it the wrong impression? Or
well,
think
no,
that
the current government is talking a lot about it, but is not modernizing the military as much as I would wish. Poland now spends more than $10 billion per annum on defense. We should be buying some serious defense system, and we're not.
You know that the government officials, the Polish officials, initiated effectively a new investigation into the airplane crash because they are not convinced with the outcomes of the investigation done by the National Investigative Services and by outsiders, international committees, and they have recently, they were, I think, in Russia to examine once again the wreckage. Why are they not convinced? Are they not convinced with the outcomes?
This new investigation is a joke, and this whole propaganda about this supposedly being an assassination is, of course, a conspiracy theory that was cynically used for internal politics. Just like President Trump used the birther conspiracy to claim that President Obama was not really American. So these populist movements usually have some kind of lie at the core of their ideology. And with our populists, it's that. But Russia, by not returning the wreckage, helped them to make the case, because they were able to say, well, they're hiding something, and therefore it wasn't an accident.
Regarding the domestic situation, political situation, of course, almost 3 years ago, the political party Law and Justice came into power. At least 1 year ago, it was still popular. It had a solid base of support among the Poles. What is the status quo right now, 1 year ahead of the next parliamentary elections here in Poland?
Remember that Law and Justice gained power in Poland with 38% of the vote.
Right.
Normally, this doesn't give you majority of seats in parliament. But the left went into that election as 4 different parties. All of them got some percentage of the vote, neither crossed the threshold. So about 15% of the vote was wasted. And that's why we have Law and Justice in power. And they seem to have more or less the same what they did. Something between 1/3 and 38% of the vote. So what's very important is what the rest of the political spectrum does. Mm-hmm. If they don't unite, they'll again lose.
But why they, like 1 year ago, they were still really popular inside the country, while heavily criticized by Western media and liberal institutions for stepping away from democratic principles?
Because every government gets tired, because you make mistakes, because, for example, ministers were caught paying themselves second salaries, and this was not popular. But people just get tired of their leaders after a while.
Is it true that in terms of welfare, of social spending, the government is giving away more money for those families which have 2 or more children, that they reversed the previous government's decision to raise their retirement age, and this was their foundation for this solid base of support?
Yes, Poland has, under this government, introduced a universal child benefit, such as exists in many other countries. You don't get it for the first child, but for all the others. And this has eradicated poverty in some areas of Poland at a very high cost. This is a policy in Poland which is very generous, which is costing almost $10 billion per annum. And we are doing it at the height of the
economic cycle,
of the business cycle. So the real question is, will we be able to afford it when the economy doesn't grow quite as fast? But you know, if you mismanage such programs, then you get a Latin American outcome, Peronist kind of outcome. You know, where populists say, well, if you vote for my opponents, they'll take your money away, and then you have a cycle of populism, and then you have, you know, a country like Argentina, which was once very rich, or Venezuela, which was once very rich, now being very poor. So one has to be very careful with this populism.
And what about this issue of migration? As far as I know, the previous government pledged to take in 7,000 refugees. When the new government came to power, it took back this pledge. That means that Poland did not take in any refugees right now. Is this true?
It's roughly true. My view is this, that if we are to preserve the Schengen zone, which is the area of free travel, without borders, without documents checks, without visas, without passports even, right? For it to function, the external border of this zone has to be policed. Well, not as countries, but as the Schengen zone, as the European Union, roughly. So where the nationalists are lying to you is when they say the issue of mass migration from North Africa and the Middle East can be solved by national means. It can only be solved by national means if you give up on the Schengen zone. If you want the Schengen zone, then you have to find a European solution. That's one issue. The other issue is, of course, what is our absorption capacity of refugees? You know, Poland is a country that has produced waves of millions of refugees for the last 300 years, ever since we had our country destroyed by Russia in the 18th century.
As, if I'm not mistaken, you left also Poland.
And I was personally a refugee from under communism, from under martial law.
Yeah.
So when the people of Aleppo are bombed, including by Russian bombers, I feel that we need to show human solidarity in a secure way. I feel that, you know, if we invite a few Christian, if need be, widows and children, that is a safe way of showing human solidarity with great suffering. And to play this game of saying that these widows are dangerous people, you know, in Hungary, very similar political, when the wave of refugees came, put up billboards all over Hungary. Refugees, respect our Hungarian culture, in Hungarian. Okay, so you're actually mobilizing your own right-wing, nativist, anti-foreigner electorate against your political opponents. And these are cynical political games.
I would like to speak about your past. It's actually, you have a very interesting personal story, because you started your political career as a journalist and you went to Afghanistan, and there was the Soviet military presented there, and it was, in my estimation, a proxy war between the United States and the Soviet Union on the Afghan soil. your sympathies were on the side of Mujahideen.
I like Russians in Russia. But when Russians come with arms uninvited to my country or somebody else's country, then I have to resist that. And the Afghans were resisting the imposition of Soviet-type communism on them, just as we were resisting in Poland. So in that sense, it was a global war, as you know, confrontation between the Soviet Union and the United States. In that sense, at that time, they were our allies.
Did you actually fight on their side, or you were just a journalist there?
As I mentioned already, mainly with the pen and the photo lens.
Mainly, but to some extent.
Well, there were situations, you know, when you are at night in the desert near Kandahar, and you're trying to cross the Kabul-Jalalabad, the Kandahar-Kabul highway, and there are Spetsnaz patrols, and you hear Russian helicopters, and you are on a pickup truck trying to, in my case at that time, trying to get from Pakistan to Herat, all the way near the Iranian and Soviet borders at the same time. A journey that took me 6 weeks one way. At night, imminent threat of a Russian ambush. You know, waving your journalistic card would not help you much in that situation. You know, you would need to, if you got attacked, you would need at least to get back to the border.
So you actually used a gun occasionally?
So I was with a unit and I was sharing their dangers.
My last question is about Syria, because it's also another more or less a proxy war between the United States and Russia, who is...
Yeah, except the United States is not fighting or has given up.
But it provides some support for the rebellions, for the rebels, and at the same time Russia is supporting the Assad regime. On what side are your sympathies, and if you had been 20 or 30 years younger, would you have gone to Syria to fight on the side of the rebels?
No, because the situation in the Greater Middle East is much more complicated. When the Arab Spring started, I rooted for the rebels, you know, I felt for the young man who burned himself in Tunisia, and it turned out that when a little bit like the Bolsheviks in Russia, taken advantage of by fanatics. And now we have the outcomes that we have. And I think President Putin skillfully exploited Western mistakes. Namely, we thought the choice was between democrats and autocrats. He thought, rather more cynically and realistically, that the choice was between autocrats in mustaches and autocrats with beards. And in Syria, he's supporting the autocrat with a, well, no, he might not have a mustache, but his father did. I fear that Russia is going to find out that the Middle East is much more complicated and much more dangerous for the country intervening than the current leadership imagines. The United States has been making its mistakes in the Middle East. I'm afraid it's Russia's turn now.
Mr. Sikorski, thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you.